Okay, so what I'm doing right now is just securing the clay to the board and making sure that I don't have any of those little caves where, I'm sorry, I'm gonna move around a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, making sure that there's nowhere for the latex to slip underneath. And maybe this does have a tiny bit of an undercut on the bulbous end of this teardrop form, but I'll leave that because that'll be proof that you can have a little bit of an undercut in one direction when you're using a flexible molding material like latex. Okay, so it's on there, right? Not going anywhere. I'm inspecting it just to make sure that there are no little areas where the latex can slip under. And now I'm ready to take the next step. So what you'll need in this process is a cheapy brush. I recommend just one of these chip brushes. I have some to give away. If you don't have any, I'll check and see if I've got extra for the whole class. And I recommend using some dish soap like Dawn or something similar. And what that does is it kind of puts like a protective coating on the bristles so that once you start painting on the latex doesn't stick to the bristles of the brush, and it makes it easier to wash the latex out. So this is just a little bit of Dawn soap, and I'm dipping the brush into there so that my brush is ready to go. We need to use something called mold release. So when you cast in your material, it cures, and then you're demolding. You want to use something that facilitates the mold getting facilitates the casting getting out of the mold. So in this instance, I'm going to use petroleum jelly. Depending on what you're using for your molding material and what you're using for your casting material, you may not always be able to use petroleum jelly. If you're using things like resin for your casting material, if you're using silicone for your molding material, sometimes it might be a specific spray mold release that goes with the molding material or the casting material.
What are you using right now?
Just petroleum jelly. What else? What's the other name?
Vaseline.
Vaseline, thank you.
What's Dawn for again? Dawn dish soap.
To make sure that the latex doesn't stick to the brush. Yeah.
Dip the brush.
So it's like a mold release for the brush, in a sense.
So like any soap would do like 7th generation?
I think so. Yeah, Dawn, I know it's made by a yucky company, but it it's what they use to clean all the ducks when they get covered.
That's what I was asking.
It's the one everybody uses.
Yeah, it is. So there's something in it that really is a good release agent. Okay, so I just dipped a finger into the Vaseline, and I'm going to do a very light coating on my pattern. And if your finger doesn't get to everything, you might need a brush to kind of get into textured areas potentially. And I want it to be so light so that it's not leaving globs behind, and it's not creating its own texture on your clay. So you're going to cover your entire clay piece, and you're also going to cover the board, create that flange, right? So wherever you're going to paint latex around your pattern, you also want to do a light coating of the Vaseline on the board. And your board, like I have these little chipboard pieces for you, or pieces of plywood. it doesn't have to be that. It can also be like the lid from a jar or something. It's just a substrate. Any questions so far? Okay, so my next step is applying the first layer of latex. It's a little bit stinky, but it's not toxic, okay? So I'm just going to work with what's in the lid. That's a little thick. Get some out of the jar too. And this first coat is the most important coat. It's called the skin coat, because you want it to be as thin as like your epidermis, okay? And it's really going to register all of your detail, especially for those of you who have texture on your pieces. You really want to be careful and diligent in applying the latex. So a thin coat. And if you have depressions or texture, this is when you want to make sure that you, like, I'll show you what, like, don't let it be that thick, okay? Really use the brush, move it around, because when it's that thick, you can't be sure that the latex is getting down into the textured areas. If you thin it out, it becomes a little translucent, and you can see like, oh yeah, it skipped over that textured area or that depression. And I'm giving myself a very healthy flange around the piece just to be on the safe side. And that's it. Okay, so just so you can see up close and personal how thin it is. I can still see the clay underneath it. That's good. Okay, that means that I didn't go too heavy. Then you're gonna wait for this to dry. I always get the question, how long? The answer is, I don't always know. Depends on the weather, depends on the temperature of your house. We're moving into a rainstorm, so layers of latex can take a little bit longer if there's more humidity in the air and if it's colder out.
If we do this like at home, can we do it inside or do we have to do it outside?
You can do it inside,
Okay.
yeah. If the smell of it bothers you, then I would say move
Is it
outside.
toxic?
It's not toxic.
Okay.
It's just what they might classify as a nuisance. Monty?
At home,
Uh-huh.
I have like an air purifier and like a heater for, like, not like a heat gun, but like,
Like a
when you
space
do,
heater?
when you do like pottery, you like a space heater.
Mhm.
Could I like put that like by it if it's cold out? Like by it.
I
not
would,
near it?
yeah, but a safe distance, because you'll see in the instructions on Canvas, I talk about don't put your layer of latex on and then take a hairdryer to
Yeah.
it, okay? You want it to dry as naturally as possible, because what a hairdryer will do is dry the top surface of the latex, but not what's underneath. And then you get these little blisters of latex, and then your mold is garbage, because it's like eventually it's going to break down and you're not going to get good castings. Okay, so you can like, I've noticed that my microwave, because there's a light underneath it, like the ambient temperature in the microwave is pretty warm, but it's not hot, it's just like if you left the heat on a
80
little too
like
high
80
and
degrees or
like
something.
not being eco-friendly at all. You could put it in a warm place or like high up on a shelf. That's better than down on the ground, and that is a way to kind of speed up the dry time.
I
So,
just
like-
mentioned because I live in like a concrete box, so
Yeah.
if I add like a
Yeah.
heater to my room, it might like speed up a little
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah, it's nice if it's like close to a warm
Yeah.
thing.
Like cooking heat lamps, are those okay, do you think? I think that's too hot.
Like a chicken lamp?
No, it's like my stove has these lamps.
Oh,
that,
the light.
like the hood has.
As
these-
long as it's of safe distance.
Yeah, no,
from
it's
it.
it's like that.
Yeah, I think that should be okay. I
It's
saw
a
another
warm
hand up
light?
too.
I thought it was just a light.
I have both of them. There's some that are heat lights, and you have to get a special
Ah.
bulb for that, and then I have regular lights.
I didn't know that. That's okay.
They're just like a little like red lights you get like home. Like,
Yeah,
Oh
and
yeah,
that's
but because above the stove there's like the light thing,
Yeah.
but I
Right.
never thought you could like put a hot lamp situation. I thought it was just a light to
well,
hook.
it depends on the thing. Like mine are in the back, the heat lamps, and then the front ones are like, regular just
Yeah, yeah,
bright
yeah.
lights. Anyway, enough about kitchen design.
Was there another question? I saw another
Oh,
hand.
it was just about the hair dryer, but I got it.
The hairdryer, yeah, okay. All right, so you're gonna wait 10, 20, maybe a half an hour, I don't know. It just kind of depends. But we're gonna pretend that this is like Martha Stewart's cooking show and like this first layer is dry, okay? So just pretend. So you've done your skin coat, which is your first coat. It is dry. How do you know it's dry? Well, if you touch it and it does not transfer, then you're good to go. You'll also notice that it goes from like opaque to translucent. Do we all know the different, like opaque is like totally solid, translucent is like the kind of frosted version on this cup, right? But also just a gentle tap, and if it doesn't transfer, then you're good to go. So then you're gonna do a second layer, and you don't have to be quite as careful. You can go a little bit thicker. And just, do your best to really, like, don't be sleepy, don't be drunk when you're applying the latex, like, pay attention to what you're doing. Make sure that you get all the surfaces, like, turn it every which way to make sure that you're getting all of those nooks and crannies.
And it can be a little thicker on this coat.
It can be a little bit thicker on this second coat. Yeah, because that skin coat has done all the details. Okay, and make sure that, again, that you're doing the flange all the way around. All right, coat number 2, let it dry. Then you're gonna do coat number 3. And Sophia, can I ask you a huge favor? Will you grab me a pair of scissors? I knew I always forget something when I set up for, yeah, those are perfect. Thank you very much. Third coat, you can apply this in the same manner as the second coat. But this is where you're gonna start integrating the cheesecloth. So when you took your little wad, it was probably 3 or 4 layers thick. So pull them all apart so that you've just got one layer. And what you'll notice about the cheesecloth is that it's very gauzy, very flexible, and that's what we want. This is why we use cheesecloth and not a different type of fabric for this, so that it really can conform to your pattern. So I've applied the third layer. Use your imagination for that part, and then you're going to cut up the cheesecloth into small little pieces, and you're going to start integrating them into the latex. And I recommend lay the piece of cheesecloth down and then stop using your fingers. Use the brush that has more latex in it to pat it down. And so notice that I'm using the tip of the brush and really getting into that corner. So you don't want the cheesecloth to tent over the form at all. You want it to hug the form like Remember when jeggings were a thing? Or are you too young for that? They're still a thing? Yeah, so like a pair of jeggings, like skin tight, really make sure that the cheesecloth is hugging the form.
So you're painting the cheesecloth on, you don't have to worry
Is there
about.
a fourth layer then?
Say that again,
Is
Doug?
there a fourth layer of the,
This is during the third layer.
so
The
more,
third layer, but you're in the process of burying the cheesecloth, you are kind of doing a fourth layer. Okay? And
The intent is to get the cheesecloth anyway, not to put out a fourth layer per se.
I'm sorry, one more time?
You're not aiming to put a fourth layer on per se, it's the object is to get the cheesecloth. in.
Correct. It's just to make sure that that cheesecloth is really in there.
Do you have to wait for the second layer to dry before you do the cheesecloth?
The cheesecloth will happen in the third layer. And no, you're not waiting for that third layer to dry. You're using the fact that that third layer is wet. And
But the second one is gonna be dry before
the
you start
second one is going to be dry before you, yes, because again, you don't want to trap wet latex in this process.
So it's okay if there's more than one layer of cheesecloth in a certain area?
Totally.
Okay.
In fact, overlap the pieces, right? So if you can see as I'm layering them, I am overlapping. And if it sticks out beyond the edge of the latex flange, that's okay.
You can just trim that off later, right?
Trim it off later, precisely. And when you're adding more latex to integrate the cheesecloth, try to get to this kind of a surface. Okay, so I'm gonna close up for the camera. And then for everyone else, right? So it's like, we don't really see a ton of the cheesecloth texture. And if you can come in on Tuesday with this much done, then we're probably good to go and you can actually do your casting on Tuesday.
So you
Okay?
don't put another coat on after the cheesecloth?
You don't have to,
Okay.
because it's if you've put them on as thick as I've done on layers, 2 and 3, which were really supposed to be kind of like 3 and 4, you shouldn't have to.
Okay.
I'll see if I can show you examples of when I would recommend that you put on another layer. And I say this in the directions on canvas, once this dries, if you peel up the edge of it and it's thinner than like a dish glove, then I would say put on one more layer. Or if you get this done and it's well before next Tuesday and you still have some latex in the jar, there's no harm in throwing on a 5th layer. It's it just makes your mold stronger.
In areas that are thinner for the mold, should we put more cheesecloth in those areas to make sure the mold doesn't break when we take them out, or should we just do it all at the same time?
Yeah, I don't think it's,
Doesn't
because
matter.
there's kind of a fine line where if you put too much cheesecloth in, it makes it really rigid, and then you don't have that flex
flex,
in the
right.
in the mold anymore.
When you're washing the paintbrush, can it go down the drain or?
That's a great question. So before I answer that, I will say in between uses, what I would do is just stick your brush in a Ziploc bag and put it in the refrigerator. Okay, and that kind of keeps it fresh and pliable, because if you don't do that, then the latex will dry in the bristles and then you have a stick and not a brush. When you're washing the latex out, if you're doing this kind of all in one day or over the course of 2 days, you don't necessarily have to wash the latex out. Ziploc bag, refrigerate. If you are not gonna get to it for like 24 hours or something, I would say, yeah, wash it out. I would just fill a little container with water and wash the brush out in that, because when you wash the brush out in the sink, it'll create like the latex gets really like boogery very quickly. So you'll notice that in our sink, I've got a red bucket. And so if you do this in class, I recommend rinse it out in the bucket first. And then it's easy to just kind of scoop all the little latex boogers and throw them in the trash. Yes.
At home, when we do the rinsing and washing, can we just throw it in like a gray water area in our backyard or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
It's gonna be like toxic
nah.
or anything?
I don't think so. And it's so little
Yeah, that's what I
material.
was just thinking.
Yeah.
So if you have to apply the fourth layer, do you put the cheesecloth again?
Skin coat, second coat, third coat, into
cheesecloth.
cheesecloth, and then kind of a fourth coat
Right.
to integrate.
Yeah, but then you said like if it's thin or like we have enough time. we
Then
can
add
put
another layer.
Another layer of cheesecloth.
No, just the latex. Just the latex, yes. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Thank you for recording.